we're going to talk about how to have healthy boundaries with work. And the thing that we're going to focus on today is how to have healthy rhythms of work and rest in our lives. Because I really do believe that we can really thrive if we have a healthy rhythm of work and rest in our lives. Work is a big part of our lives, and it's a good part of our lives, but it's important to have boundaries so that our lives don't get consumed with work. And when work consumes our lives, it becomes more difficult to keep a healthy perspective, and it can really also damage our relationships as well. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, having healthy boundaries with work, because I really believe that can make all the difference. So some of you might know that I grew up in Japan, and I remember the first job that I ever had. My first paid job was working for my uncle on his rice farm, planting rice plants in the fields. I think I was around 12 at that time. And I remember just the feeling of joy that I got from working in those fields. You know, it was really hard work, but there was something about it. That sense of fulfillment was just so special. And I remember that so clearly, even just that first day of work, how good I felt after working in the fields. And, you know, despite all the sunburns I got and the muscle ache, there was something there that just felt so fulfilling, a sense of joy, because I felt like I had accomplished something. And then when I was 16, I got my second job at McDonald's in a mall, and I still remember that first day of work when I put my McDonald's uniform on, I had my apron on and all that stuff, and I walked in, I was like ready to go, here we go, this was kind of like my first real job, just apart from like working with family, and I still remember walking in feeling, nervous and all that kind of stuff, and I didn't know what they were going to ask me to do that day for sure, if I was going to be in the front, or if I was going to be working in the back, maybe in the kitchen. And I arrived there, and I found out that morning they were wanting me to take apart the ice cream machine. So how many of you know that McDonald's ice cream machine is like never working? But they wanted me to take that ice cream machine apart and to basically clean the entire thing and put it back together. Well, I'm not good with machines and, taking things apart, stuff like that. So that was about the worst thing that I could, do. So I had to take this whole thing apart and put all the parts in they had this little case where they all fit to make sure that none were missing. So we cleaned the whole thing out. And then I put it back together. But when I put it back together, when I thought I was finished, there were still some pieces left. And so then I was faced with this situation where on my first day of work, I had to tell my supervisor that I had put the machine together wrong. And I still remember just that, they were very gracious. I'm grateful. I didn't lose my job. But work is one of those things that, can feel at times like, we have to do things we don't always enjoy. It can be a grind at times. I remember even working at McDonald's, sometimes I'd be, counting the hours. I'd be looking at the clock, and it just felt like time was just standing still, right? It's just not moving. But I just want to, start by saying today that if you have a hard time taking your mind off of work at times, or if you find yourself unable to rest from work, Jesus has great compassion for you. And I know that you're all in different stages of life, and some of you work really long hours. Others of you are busy because of young kids. Some of you might be in between jobs or retired. But whatever season of life you're in, I believe that there are some really great insights that we can learn from the Bible about healthy rhythms of rest and work. And the reason we're looking at the Bible today is because the Bible is the story of God's love for the world. And it's also kind of like God's owner's manual for life. It has a ton of ideas and insights in it that can help us to do life better. So I want to take us to a few different places in the Bible today, and I want to talk about this idea of how to create boundaries in our work. So let's start right near the beginning of the Bible in a book called Genesis. And this is where we read about how God created the world at the beginning. And so I'll just read to you Genesis chapter 3, verses 2 to 3, and you feel free to follow along on the screen here. It says, on the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation. So here we see God is a God who works. So he rested from all of his work. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because it was the day when he rested from all his work of creation. So here we read about the fact that when God created the world, he rested on the seventh day. So for 6 days he was busy working, creating. But on the seventh day it was different. He took a rest. You know, sometimes we have this image of God that maybe he's just up in heaven, you know, twiddling his thumbs or whatever. But the truth is that God is a creative God who works. And the Bible says that we are created in God's image. So we are also created to work. But what's amazing here is that God stopped working on the seventh day. He rested from all his work, not because he needed to. God doesn't need rest. It wasn't like he got tired, but he stopped working because his work was complete. And it was kind of like a celebration of his completed work, a way to look at his work and say, this is good. So this word that comes up here, Sabbath, it's not in this verse, but seventh day is also can be called Sabbath, and this word simply means to stop or to rest. And this seventh day is called holy, meaning that it's a special day that is set apart from all the other days. So there's something different, something special about this day. And right from the beginning, that's the way God established the week. He established this day of rest, of stopping from work. So this is where it all started, but let's read from the book of Exodus. And this is a famous part of the Bible when God gives the people of Israel what are called the 10 Commandments. So the 10 Commandments were to serve as kind of like the backbone of the terms of the Israelites' partnership with God. And if the people of Israel could follow these terms, then they would become God's representatives to the other nations. And out of these 10 commandments, in the fourth commandment, God brings up this idea of the seventh day once again. So let's read this here in Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 to 11. It says, remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the seventh day he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. You see, before God rescued the people of Israel, for over 400 years, they were slaves in Egypt. And so this whole idea of taking a day off to rest was completely radical for them. It's a completely new concept. They've never gotten a day off before, and so this idea of even resting ever from work was a really huge deal. So as one of the 10 commandments, when God instructed them to remember this seventh day, this Sabbath, this day of rest, that was completely like revolutionary for them. And the reason this was so important to have this day was because taking a day to pause and to rest was kind of like a sign to all their neighbors, all the other nations, that they were now a free people. They're no longer slaves anymore. And not only that, but it also tells us that God really loved them for who they are, not for what they do. And that's incredibly important for us today as well, that we are deeply loved by God, not for what we do, but just for who we are. So this day of rest was actually really important for these reasons. But unfortunately, if you fast forward to the days when Jesus was on this earth, the Pharisees, who were the religious leaders at that time, they made this day of rest into a really strict kind of religious rule, like a religious duty. And they started to make all these rules about what you can and can't do on that day. They missed the point that the Sabbath is a gift from God to people, and it's a boundary that God has given to people so that they could experience rest and joy. So I'm just going to read to you a short story from the book of Mark. And Mark was a disciple and a close friend of Jesus, so he wrote firsthand what he saw happen during his time with Jesus. And this is what he wrote. It says, on one Sabbath day, as Jesus was walking through some grain fields, his disciples began breaking off heads of grain to eat. But the Pharisees said to Jesus, "Look, why are they breaking the law by harvesting grain on the Sabbath?" Jesus said to them, "Haven't you ever read in the scriptures what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He went into the house of God during the days when Abiathar was high priest, and broke the law by eating the sacred loaves of bread that only the priests are allowed to eat. He also gave some to his companions." Then Jesus said to them, "The Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people, and not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even over the Sabbath." So what's happening here is Jesus and his disciples are walking along these grain fields, and the disciples are hungry. So they start picking off the bits of grain to eat, and the Pharisees see them doing this, and so they start to question Jesus, and they say, "Whoa, what's going on here? You guys are breaking the law. You're not, following the rules." And what had happened was that the Pharisees had set up 39 different categories, not just 39 things, but different categories of things that you were not allowed to do on the Sabbath. And so, things like you can't go grocery shopping, you can't, go fix your house, you can't do this. And the categories, there's 39 things you can't do on that day. And so whenever they'd see anyone, breaking those rules, they would go and they would point it out, and, they would just be like, kind of catch people and make them, feel bad and punish them. And Jesus, he in this moment, he comes and says, "I'm the Lord of the Sabbath." Basically, what he's telling the Pharisees is that he is greater than the law, because he is God who actually invented the Sabbath in the first place. He's the one who came up with it. It was his idea. And so he's restoring the meaning to the Sabbath and to this day of rest that was meant to be something good. It was meant to be for our benefit. And the Pharisees had, they weren't even able to keep the law themselves, and so they came up with all these extra things, all these extra rules about the Sabbath as kind of a way of maintaining their control and their power as leaders. And so in this way, they made themselves kind of like in control, like lords over the people, and they'd seized this control, and they were oppressing the people with all these rules. But as followers of Jesus, we're not bound to these strict rules, because Jesus came and he made it clear once again that he is the source of rest for us, and that the Sabbath was never meant to be a burden. It was never meant to be something that weighed heavy on us. It was meant to be a gift for our good. It's a gift from God and a reminder for us that we don't need to earn our way to God, but that we simply get to trust him. And one of the greatest ways that we show God that we really trust him is by taking time to rest from our work, both physically and mentally. And when we rest, it's a way of showing him that we trust him to keep the world going while we pause. It's really a way of acknowledging that ultimately we trust that he will provide for our needs, that God is fully capable of keeping the world running while we stop. So with all of this in mind, if this is a priority for Jesus and something that he wants for us, then as followers of Jesus, how can we also make boundaries with work a priority? Or maybe you don't consider yourself to be a follower of Jesus yet, but you really want to start putting good boundaries in place with your work. So where can we start? Well, I'm going to give you just 4 practical things today that we can all do that will hopefully help us to put some good boundaries in place with our work. And it's been said that one of the biggest regrets people have at the end of their lives is that they did too much of what people expected of them and that they worked too hard. This is one of the top regrets people have. And I don't want to, get to the end of my life and feel like I missed out on time with my family or spending time with God and enjoying that gift of rest that he's given to us. And so with that in mind, here are some things that we can do to help with that. The first is to learn to say no to lesser demands. So learn to prioritize and to figure out what is most important. So the key here is to learn to say no to the less important things so that we can say yes to the important things. And each of us have the same exact amount of time every day. We each have 24 hours. And so the question becomes, how are we going to spend that time? Now, if you're like me, you might say, well, I don't really know what to prioritize because all the things that I do seem to be pretty important. I've definitely felt that way where it's just felt like I don't know where to start in terms of prioritizing things. But today I just want to give you a tool that hopefully will help you to be able to prioritize a bit better. I found this very helpful. And it's called the Eisenhower Matrix, and it's something that is actually used in businesses and things like that to increase productivity. And so the idea behind this is that there are 4 different boxes. And I noticed this morning there's a typo there on the word important down there, but you can just ignore that. So the idea is each box kind of tells you something about that task. And so the first box on the top left are the things that are both important and urgent. So it's really something that is important to you, and it's also has kind of a time crunch element to it as well. So it means that you need to do it relatively soon. And then next to it is the top right corner. Those are the things that are important, but that are not really urgent, meaning they're things that really are important to you, but there isn't an imminent deadline. So this would be things maybe like, working out or budgeting or reading your Bible, spending time with your spouse or with your kids, or having a Sabbath day, a day of rest, things like that. And the key with this category is to schedule the activities and plan when you're going to do them. Because I've found for myself, if you don't plan when you're going to do them, they just don't happen. Life is just too busy. There's too much going on. And here's the sad part is that with these things, because they're important things, by the time you realize that you should have done them, it's often too late. By then, if it's fitness, by the time you realize you should have done it, I'm badly out of shape. Or if it's budgeting, your finances are in trouble. by the time you realize. Or, maybe you haven't spent any time with family, and so you don't have a relationship with your kids. That's often how it goes with these things. If you don't schedule them, it's often too late. And so scheduling these things is incredibly important to make sure that they actually get done. And then the bottom left square represents the things that are urgent, meaning they're things that need to be done, but they aren't important in terms of helping you reach your goals. So for example, if you hate budgeting, that's something that is important, but just as you go, you sit down to do your finances, we've all been there, right? Where you have this sudden urge to all of a sudden, clean the whole house, right? If it's something that you just don't like doing, all of a sudden you sit down and you're like, oh man, I should really vacuum here, or I should maybe, do the dishes or something like that, right? Or maybe some of you are, do stress baking, where it's like, man, I really should bake some cookies right now, right? All of a sudden that seems like a really urgent task. And, the thing is, all of a sudden those things seem like I should get them done, but then the other important things keep getting pushed. Then the bottom right box represents the things that are not important and also not urgent. And these things can be incredibly difficult to identify because, for the most part, we'd like to believe that we spend our time on things that are important. But if you're able to identify some of the things that you can take out of your schedule, this can make a really big difference. The things that we choose not to do are just as important as the things that we choose to actually spend our time doing. So I hope that this tool is helpful for you. You can look it up online as well, and there's some great articles on it as well. But learning to prioritize is a priority for us around here. And so I encourage you to use this and just start, just to think about what box each of your tasks might fit in. And when I say work, I'm not just talking about your job, but anything that is, taking your kids to their lesson, or doing things around the house, or all of those things can fit into these categories. And so I just want to encourage you to start fitting those in and see how you might be able to adjust your priorities. And I also want to encourage you, if you have challenges with it, or if you have questions, talk to somebody, talk to your small group, or talk to a friend and have them go over it with you, and maybe have them help you identify what things are important in your life. And if Jesus is a part of your life as well, I really want to encourage you to invite him into that process as well as you go through all of those things. So that's the first thing, is to learn to prioritize, to have healthy boundaries with work. The second thing is to schedule regular times of rest throughout your week. So we talked about this idea of Sabbath, and Pete Scazzero, he's an author. He writes about 2 important rhythms that we can put into practice in order to thrive spiritually. And the first idea is the idea of the Sabbath, where we stop our regular work and intentionally take one day from our week to rest and to just enjoy that gift that God has given to us. So the purpose of this day is really just to rest and to worship and to just enjoy. And so to do the things that really fill you up and that are really life-giving to you. And now I know some of you are thinking, but Johann, my job requires me to work long hours, and often I go 2-3 weeks without a break. And there's really just no way around that. So I can't take that 7th day off. And if that's you, I totally understand where you're coming from. And I know that everybody's schedule is different. And so what works for me might not necessarily work well for you. But the main idea of Sabbath is to take set aside a period of time, ideally a day, like 24 hours, and to make time where you can stop working and just rest and take time to just delight in God. And the second thing that Pete Scazzero talks about is this idea of the daily office. That's what he calls it. I like to call these pause moments. So the idea here is that even apart from that Sabbath day, that one day of rest, we also take moments throughout our regular work days where we intentionally pause and we focus on Jesus. And so this could be for 5 minutes, it could be for 30, whatever works for you. And during this time you might want to read a short devotional or go for a walk or listen to worship music or pray or read your Bible. It's not really the length of time or the specifics of what you do here that's really important. But the important thing is to schedule moments throughout your day for moments where you can just take your focus off of your work for a minute. Whatever it is that you're doing, just to take your focus off of that and just to take a moment to remember that Jesus is with us. And this can really bring meaning to all the other tasks that we do throughout our day. I've found this to be incredibly helpful and really a game changer in my own spiritual journey. The third thing that we can do to have healthy boundaries with work is to turn off your phone and put it away. I really think this is one of the simplest and most effective things that we can do, especially in this day and age that we live in, to put away our phones. Now, I know that some of you have jobs where you're, always on call, or where you do need to have your phone with you a lot more. And so this isn't always easy to do, but if you can, even for a short period of time, I have found this to be one of the things that I can do that really, really helps me to take my mind off of my work. And I found this to be incredibly helpful just for my overall well-being, my spiritual well-being as well. I love technology, I love the internet, I love being able to connect with family and friends all over the world. I really like being able to do all of that. But one of the downsides of our world being so connected is that it makes it a lot harder to have boundaries with your work. Because people can reach us at the touch of a button any second, and you're pulled right back into your job. So even if it means you can only put your phone away during supper with your family, or you can only put it away for a little bit before you go to bed, I just want to encourage you, do what you can. I've found this to be incredibly helpful as a way of putting up boundaries with my work, and it's something that I think all of us can do to really just help us take a little bit of a rest and get some distance from our jobs. It's really hard to live in the moment when you're being pulled away, when you're being pulled into everyone else's moment through social media and news and texts and all of these things. Our brains weren't created to be able to handle that much information being thrown at us at once. So I really think this is one of the biggest struggles in our world today, is that we can get pulled into everyone else's moment, and that it can pull us away from our priorities. Because ultimately, if we just go with the flow, we'll be pulled into everyone else's priorities, not our own. I really do believe that smartphones are a Sabbath killer. And if we let them take over our lives, we really won't find a moment of rest. And so I really believe that the key to using technology in a healthy way is to learn to control the technology, not let the technology control you. The fourth thing is to communicate your boundaries with others. Now, this might be one of the most challenging things to do, but it might be necessary at times to communicate your work boundaries with other people. For example, you might need to communicate these boundaries with your spouse. When Emma and I first started working together, after we got married, even when we were working different jobs, it was really easy to let talk about work just kind of take over our lives, even at home, where we just found ourselves always talking about work. And so we've had to learn to communicate our boundaries with each other, that there's certain times when we just don't talk about work. We just spend time with each other. And you might even need to communicate your boundaries with other family members or with coworkers as well. You might need to make it clear at times that when you are available and when you're not available to talk about work things, unless it's an absolute emergency. And so in this way, it's making sure that you're not always getting texts and phone calls about things that really aren't all that important. So those are just some things that I've learned that have really helped me. So I hope that's helpful for you. I just want to wrap up today by just reading to you the words of Jesus from Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 to 30. And this is Jesus talking. Jesus said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." I love the words of Jesus here. Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you." What does that mean exactly? Well, when I was a kid and I read this, I always thought of like egg yolks, right? Like how do you like your eggs kind of thing, soft or medium or whatever. I always thought of that. But what Jesus is talking about here when he says my yoke, take my yoke, is that a yoke is like a wooden bar, it's a wooden frame that you would put on two farm animals, like cattle or horses. And this yoke would join the two animals together so that they could combine strength to pull a load, like a wagon that would have been too heavy for one animal to carry on their own. And the purpose of this yoke was to lighten the load and to make it easier. The yoke, this word yoke, was also used to describe the teaching of a Jewish teacher. So Jesus is saying, look, the Pharisees' teaching is really a heavy burden, but I came to make things lighter for you. I came to make things better. So when Jesus says, "Take my yoke," he's basically saying here, link up with me, connect with me, and let's work together as a team, and let me pull the load with you. That's the invitation that he's giving to us here. See, the religious leaders at that time would teach people to follow all these rules, so many rules, and it was so hard. It was all about striving to keep up. Excuse me. And if you didn't perform up to that standard, then you weren't good enough. But taking this yoke of Jesus is all about grace. It's all about a relationship. It's a partnership of joining with him. Being a follower of Jesus is not about following all these rules. It's not about feeling guilty and heavy and burdened all the time. But it's about a relationship where I get to learn